Nice. And then I just want to share my screen so we have like a reminder of what we're talking about. Okay. So the where to start? I feel like the video that's posted for this paper club, the speaker Jerry Kaplan, he tries to address quite a few issues, and so what I did is I separated them into questions, and I have a lot of like sub questions related to that. And the first question I just wanted to ask everyone is like, what is AI to you, or what do you think AI is? In the video, Jerry says that it's a form of automation, like in its extension, it's an extension of automation, nothing more and nothing less than that. And I think it's a really interesting question, more from the perspective that that depending on who you ask, there's different definitions of what AI is. Like I think for a lot of people who are coming out of university or master's courses now, AI tends to mean only deep learning. And basically, depending on what era you're from, the definition changes. Actually, so to me, what would I consider AI to be? I think AI is coming up with an accurate mathematical model, accurate enough mathematical model of the world, and that you're able to accomplish some task where the decision-making of the task is performed automatically. That would be my definition of AI, but that was just a first attempt at it. Does anyone have any other definitions of AI or ways they think about AI?
I would say one of the, in my opinion at least, big distinctions is that compared to like the old way of just having a system that has some hard written rules that are just being followed by a program, is that here as a programmer or software engineer, you don't know what the outcome is going to be when you press the button. Whereas of course for a hard coded system, you technically know it, but you have designed it. Here it might be slightly different, and I think that is an exciting thing, right? Because you have some sort of perception of data from within the machine. You of course can't really say what is that perception, but somehow the machine sees data and interprets it. And I think that is, in my opinion, at least what makes it different from, say, the stuff from the 50s or 60s, but he was also talking about, like this logical symbolism and what it was.
And as a follow-up to that, why do you think that what's different between then and now that's allowed us to get these machines that are able to basically surprise us with their results?
Because it sort of shows that it's not the work of at least a single human anymore, right? So it's not a decision process that has been done by a human and just copied, even though, of course, in many supervised learning settings, that ultimately becomes the case, right? If you build a supervised learner on human labels, you do copy humans to some extent, but still it's different. At least it feels different.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's an interesting take, I actually think, because it's not something you'd normally, if there was a definition of AI today, I don't think it would get in there, but it's a really good point. Cool. Does anyone have any other opinions they want to share about what is AI or what is AI to them? If not, I'll go on to the next question. Oh, there's something posted in the chat. For me, it is just for me it is just fancy function approximation. I don't think that's a flawed view of AI. like I said, I think it's trying to come up with mathematical models that give a good approximation of the world for the task you're trying to solve. So I think we have it. We are in line there. But
I guess in a similar spirit, I could say it's a application for optimization algorithms with the aim to make them generalizable. But again, it's very specific to the ML models we currently have. It's a bit. It's still a bit too narrow, I think. But captures what we currently do with models.
Yeah, Vincent also put in a good comment. I think the ability to adapt to the environment, and I think that might be similar to the opposite case of hard-coded rules as well, right? So that if you don't have hard-coded rules, somehow, yeah, the code itself becomes reactive to something. People here can generally speak, right? Everybody has the ability to speak.
Yeah, I think I've unmuted everyone. Yeah, if you want to ask a question, you can just unmute yourself, or you could just put it in the chat. Doesn't matter. So the second question, which is, I'll let you just know that why I'm asking this question, which is leading on to the third and relates to the first is the second question is, what is human intelligence? Because we talk a lot about that. But then the next question is, well, the perception of AI, but it's really, the follow-up is like, will computers ever think like humans, or do they even have that capability? And it kind of relates to the Chinese room thought experiment that that you may have read. So I actually thought that there was a lot of points that were brought up about. So before we go into the perception of AI, I just like talking like, what is human intelligence to us? Because I think a good point that's made is that we tend to gauge basically autonomous systems based on their ability to accomplish tasks, and our measuring tool is like how much of our intelligence is required in order to solve that task. But like, so and what is human intelligence to, and one thing I wanted to point out about that is what I think is really interesting is that it shows like a really clear bias in the way that we judge things. Like we are basically we have and I would say I'm included in this. It's like we have such tunnel vision in the way that we judge autonomous systems because we're judging them from the perspective of human intelligence. And I think it's a really hard thing to say to ourselves, like, well, what if this thing is acting in a different way that I cannot understand and still able to accomplish a task? Some things that are pointed out as human intelligence in the video are things like one-shot learning, how you can show a 3-year-old, you can point a 3-year-old cat out to a 3-year-old, and the 3-year-old from then on will be able to recognize cats. So we have something in us that's allows us to like very quickly categorize new things. I guess it is. I don't have a great answer for this, and I think if I did, I don't know, I'd probably get like a Nobel Prize.
I have a good analogy from last week's paper, because they talk about reasoning, right? Like reasoning intelligence are quite related terms, and the example from 3-year-old learning. So it seems like the most powerful models we currently have don't reason, but a human, a child, doesn't need to see 5 times 10 over and over again to understand that if 4 times 10 is 40, 5 times 10 would be 50, right? So that's one example of human intelligence, and something I don't think we currently have anywhere near to having in modern models.
I think what was a really underlying problem is that when we say human versus a computer, what's actually the difference between us and the computer? because probably you've heard in the last couple of years, people started working on building quantum machines or quantum computing. So the idea that a system that evolves in certain ways can be in principle a computer that can calculate certain things, certain classical calculations. And now if we think a bit further, then at the end of the day, the whole world follows these very simple mechanical rules, essentially Schrödinger's equation, right? So one can write the dynamic, how to say, the dynamic, the dynamic form of the world in form of an equation that is essentially linear in time. And that, of course, raises the question, if that is true, then by that definition, humans are also computers, right? There is, in the laws of physics, there is by itself nothing that speaks of, lack of a better term, like a soul. And when we talk about human intelligence, I always have the impression that we still try very hard to fight that humans are indeed special, that we have something that is not mechanically reducible, that if the idea is that even if you could understand all of our laws of physics to the very deepest degree, and if we had all the computing power, we would not be able to replicate a human. And personally, I don't think that's true. And if anything, the last decades of AI research have shown that this view probably is justified, that more and more tasks that we would have thought are only capable when you have a soul, would not be able to be copied by a machine. Nowadays, we can see that certain tasks like object recognition can be done by a machine. So that might be a bit uncomfortable. There was in the 70s actually a paper by P.W. Anderson. He got the Nobel Prize in Physics for a lot of work. He was very groundbreaking, and he wrote this paper, More is Different, and basically talking about the effect of emergence, how very simple system with very, very simple rules can be combined together to have very, very non-simple behavior. I think the simplest example of that would be water, right? Water molecules are all the same, yet a tiny change in temperature can mean you are either a fluid, or you're a gas, or you are a solid with drastically different macroscopic properties. And of course, why shouldn't be the same thing with computers, right? A computer is mostly just silicon. Arrange the parts proper, and suddenly you have some very, very complicated behavior. The same as humans, mostly carbon, a bit of hydrogen, interesting combination of it, and suddenly you have very, very different behavior. So aren't we just on that same spectrum somewhere as a computer is?
So I think that's first off, it relates to a question I want to ask later, which is like, does anyone think that AI is moving towards being able to like surpass human intelligence or think like a human? But for me, one of the things that really stuck out from the video is how much bias comes into play in our interpretation of AI, and not only AI, a lot of things that are related to it, because they talk. I mean, I didn't really realize it the first time I watched the video, but the second time I was like, oh, wow, there's actually a lot of political and economic views being talked about in this video that aren't necessarily like they're very much more subjective about AI. But yeah, I know, I was like, wow, we use so much bias in order to judge things, and we usually fight to find ways that our bias, to find ways to confirm our bias. We'd rather confirm our bias than think about things in a different way. So, and that was kind of one of the lessons in general from this for me. But there's a couple of things that are posted. This other thing, thanks. So I wanted to along these. I think that it's hard to answer this question. What is human intelligence, and but a lot of the times the way that we actually define something is by comparison. And in the video and in the paper, they give a couple of good examples of like what people like of actions that people would consider intelligence, or they use certain words. So I thought I would start with the Chinese room from the paper. And in my opinion, so you have this person who's answering questions in English and then answering questions in Chinese. And the approach that the person is taking to answer Chinese questions can be boiled down to a lookup table. That's just like my way of thinking about it. Maybe there's another, but like the person is using a set of rules in order to find answers, which is a lookup table to me. And some words jumped out at me in the way that they were talking about this, which was that when the person is when answering in Chinese, they're outputting uninterpretable symbols to them. And then later on in the text, the author says the person is understanding in English and functioning in Chinese. So it seems like being able to interpret and understand things is like a key component of what we consider to be human intelligence. But what is that like? What does it mean to interpret something or to understand something? That's my final question, or my question related to that.
I have a story that can relate to this, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the old days, Eastern Europe, I think around Netherlands or Germany, there was a horse called Clever Hans, who was asked to perform simple arithmetic and simply neigh or perhaps gallop if he gets the correct answer. And surprisingly, he was considered the smartest horse, but it was after they maliciously changed the problem if they found out he was giving wrong solution. So though he picked up a certain pattern, he interpreted it, but he couldn't generalize it to a big problem. So interpretation and solving the problem might just be to do with the scale of recognizing patterns. That would be my opinion.
It's interesting. Hans the horse, I think it was the owner who was giving body language signals that made the horse start and stop counting sequences. So it's arguable. Yeah, you can argue it's a form of the Chinese room, right? Except there's no lookup table.
Yeah. So one thing you said, one thing I got off of that is just thinking that possibly the only way you can really, like, a definition of human intelligence is the ability to generalize past your experience to new situations. But what's interesting about that is that you can only gauge intelligence by providing someone with a new situation. So it's like if you're operating within a closed system that never changes, you'll never really be able to gauge a human's intelligence or something along those lines. Just some thoughts I had off of that.
It is, I think, also huge priors on human brain activity and so on. So more and more studies show that even babies, right, are already pre-built to look at faces and recognize faces and these sort of things. So something they pretty much from day one, and that shows that not all human behavior or reasoning is learned. It's a lot of it is already coming from the start. So it must be somewhere even encoded in our DNA, right? Or perhaps in some other chemical signatures that are given by the mother, but probably not. Probably it's already within the DNA. So does it mean is the DNA already itself intelligent? If you talk about the terms of complexity of information, is it enough? Of course, one other would argue that a child has to grow up in some form of nourishing environment. Otherwise, probably also that their brain doesn't deliver or is not being developed as it should. Again, question is, what is like the minimum stimulation one would need in order to combine DNA with an environment to produce something that seems to be intelligent? I think quite similar to the Chinese room. You could argue each brain cell is a cell. It's definitely not intelligent, right? Because it's just a cell. It's a very, very, very simple beast. Is that something like the human that doesn't speak Chinese in the Chinese room, that each individual component is not intelligent, but again, if you take all of them together, intelligence is an emergent phenomena on the whole.
Yeah, I think there is some evidence to suggest that intelligence is an emergent phenomena. One other example I like. They actually provide two examples about human intelligence. One was they were talking about how in 2005 they issued the DARPA challenge, which was like autonomous driving within like a pretty large swath of land that had some set difficulties, and they were able to autonomously drive these cars to accomplish the tasks that the cars were supposed to. And a lot of people considered that to mean that like we were getting generally intelligent machines. And in the video, they say there's some pundit on AI who says your car will truly be autonomous or intelligent when you tell it to go to work and it takes you to the beach instead. And I thought that was interesting because my question there is like, what about that?
Yes.
What about that choice shows intelligence?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that was just an arbitrary non sequitur. It doesn't show anything, right? Like having like a random number generator somewhere in there that throws you off. Good reasoning.
Oh, maybe it's personalized to you. You know, like in Iron Man movies, like your AI knows you so well that can understand you if you say something inaccurate or sarcastic, or even like you say one thing, but actually it knows you want something else. Maybe that's what it means. Not random, specialized for you.
But even then,
I thought about it as if the car just wanted to go to the beach just because it felt like it. Like,
oh yeah, that's better. That's much better.
That's how I saw it. I was like,
does it mean dogs are intelligent? So is it how you would define it?
In a sense, I think, yeah, that if you feel like it, you would do it. Yeah,
but
it's not very rigorous.
Feeling like it really mean, right? And under the hood, it means there's some sort of need by the system, right? So if we feel like eating, we're probably hungry because we need to sustain ourselves. So
yeah, I think my stance is that like we are not that different. We're just not like advanced, maybe. Like we haven't got the technology to reproduce like a human.
Yeah.
And I think it would be possible at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to build up. Oh, sorry. Please.
Yeah,
Please
I was just gonna say that at the end of the day, we're just like, I don't know, we're just like collections of like random decisions, and yeah, that are guided by like emotions or chemical reactions in our brain or something like that, which you could probably like, I don't know, get into a computer and simulate like brain reactions or like chemical reactions or something like that, and reactions to pain and whatnot. At some point, you could probably like make a human.
Yeah, maybe make some bit of noise here and there.
Sorry.
And it's funny because nature has actually many mechanisms of bistability, where a system could be in either one of two states, but it's a quasi-random. So there's a sort of mechanism behind it, but it's an unstable enough mechanism that under normal situations it becomes quasi-random. Why wouldn't something like this be also the case in our brain, that makes our spontaneity just be sort of explainable.
I wanted to add basic on the discussion from David and Arvid on what essentially, how would human intelligence define a rational decision? Like how Arvid mentioned, human intelligence is sort of backed by a very large prior, which has lasted ever since the first day on Earth. If there was any learning that time, I don't know. But you could essentially say, like, there is one event that might counteract, might give you a counterintuitive intuition to that. And I think that was the AlphaGo challenge, where you would pick a very experienced player who has a very large prior. His grandfather, great grandfather has all given all these fancy Go moves that you can use to win a game. And him with his practice and talent, he's an experience. But then there's AI, who has no prior knowledge at all, has been given the problem to explore, assuming it was a reinforcement learning, which DeepMind generates a move that is completely out of any form of decision making human has ever done. So that might explain why, if the human intelligence just becomes ubiquitous, it might, first generation might come up with irrational decisions, like how David said, running a car into a water, because maybe evolutionary prior is not, it is helping solve the problem, but it's not necessarily helping your decision making. That's what I think, how human intelligence supports decision making, as opposed to artificial intelligence, which just learns with the restrictive hypothesis and then comes up with a solution which is groundbreaking.
Natalia also said in the chat, on the example of the car and the car choosing to go to the beach, is that in the autonomous car driving case, they're driven by our needs, but in the case of choosing to go to the beach, maybe the car is actually being driven by its own needs. So it recognizes that it has needs and makes a decision accordingly. But I wanted to shift the conversation to the next question and start bringing us to some more practical elements of AI, which is the perception of AI. And so I have two questions to ask everyone. One is the speaker in the video, he says, the public discourse on AI is dangerously disconnected from the academic and technical discourse on AI. And my question to you is, do you agree with that or disagree with that? And related to that is, does anyone have any stories that they think illustrate maybe some personal stories of experiences where you see how people understand AI who maybe don't have a technical background, or and maybe the difficulties that you've had related to that?
What does dangerous mean in that context?
I don't actually think it's well defined in the video. It's just a statement that the author makes. I think maybe in the context of that video, he's talking about how different the understanding of AI is between people like the public and then people in academia and who work technically on it. But I think there's two ways. It could either hinder maybe development in AI, and there's a whole question about whether that's a bad thing or not, or possibly it could lead to the development of dangerous AI. I don't know, maybe those are the two. These are just me spitballing what dangerous means.
So he was generally thinking, right, that the public is overestimating AI, like in terms of its capabilities, and that is probably correct. Like people might think we have something that can actually reason yet, but we don't. I think we don't need it in order to be dangerous, right? So we see already quite advanced machine learning problems that are very good at figuring out what people want and enforce that behavior. And that by itself, you could argue is a form of intelligent moving without being inherently malicious. It creates malicious side effects.
Mm.
And that I think is I think what people really worry about, that most technical people I know, at least, they are not unethical people. They just don't really care that deeply. And I am get easily swept away by working on some really cool project without necessarily thinking of what potentially could be the downside of the thing I'm doing. So I definitely built algorithm which in hindsight I probably was not so proud of, because it potentially is used to exploit humans. And and I don't think I've done it because I'm evil, but just because I like the technical challenge. So does it necessarily need explicit intelligence that can reason? Probably not.
One thing off of what you said that I thought of is that possibly the issue with the disconnect in terms of understanding AI between the public and people in technical field in the field is that it obscures and simplifies the conversation. So the dangers of AI are regarded mainly as like almost primarily just the singularity. Like AI is going to take us, surpass our intelligence and take us over, and that's really bad. Whereas really it's a much more nuanced conversation. Like for example, and I guess we could talk about this in a bit, about like the economic impacts of AI. One thing I always liked is that I thought of, because when I was working in robotics specifically is really built around replacing tasks or jobs. But it's actually, it's really complicated to create systems that can do stuff, even simple control tasks in the real world that people can do. Is that like really, if you wanted to, you can still make a lot of progress there, but you could, if you concentrate on prosthetics. And so like maybe a way to be more, maybe the word is ethical, is if you're doing robotics, AI and developing AI and robotics, is try to focus on things like prosthetics, and as opposed to some of the other areas in which we're developing robotics. But my point is that like when you talk about AI, usually in the public sphere, it's only about singularity and not about these more detailed issues of how things are. So maybe that's one of the dangerous elements of the disconnect in perception between the two groups of people.
Yeah. If the singularity were to happen, would we realize it? Because I would almost think that with really smart AI, it would make us feel to be still in control. Rather than building a army of robots that's gonna put us in the house arrest or so. No, it would probably be much more subtle than that.
Yeah, there's something. What if Vahan says, "What if it's already happened?" That's funny.
But it's I think because he said it's quite an interesting topic to do. Do people lose jobs due to AI? And I personally think that he was overly optimistic, saying that new jobs are being generated and all of that. Yes, maybe, but it's not the same kind of jobs that were displaced, and they require vastly different skill sets. And I would argue, if you look at the new skill sets that are required, is of course not everybody can become an engineer. I think that is a very wrong assumption that some people's job is very easily automatable. I saw people who all they do was franking envelopes all day. That was their job. Now these kind of people would not really be the kind of people who would be the next people building new prediction engines anytime soon, I think. So what it means, it sort of creates classes in society that are based on natural predispositions. I don't know whether that is something we want to have, and whether that's something we we might need to combat. It's meritocracy. Sorry, that's not the word, but
yeah, meritocracy.
Meritocracy, that's it. Yeah, can be, I think, very, very depressing if you're on the bottom end.
Isn't this the same situation as happened during previous revolutions several times?
Yes, but the new skill sets were, you could argue that maybe 200 years ago, no one would have thought that a simple peasant could do office jobs. and nowadays we know better, but again, if these jobs get made redundant, like you don't need a PA anymore because you have automatic organizers, I would argue that would leave a lot of people who are healthy, functioning people potentially without a source of income, and that could be a massive impact. That I don't see any new jobs that potentially could be still simple enough to be understood by humans and be done only by humans that can't be sourced out.
It's an issue. I think the crux of the question is whether AI and the automation that's coming from AI, because it's able, I guess it's allowing us to accomplish tasks that usually required some logic or some deduction, or even sometimes some creativity. Like the example that they gave is Disney using AI to automatically generate the hair of Rapunzel in a movie they did. That the new jobs that, like the skills that are required for the jobs that are being created are looking for more increasingly intelligent and creative people. So that does put people at a disadvantage who either don't want to or are not creative or intelligent in terms of the skills that are being sought after. I actually do think that to a certain extent, the forms of automation that we're developing now are making it harder and harder for the quote unquote like 9 to 5 job to exist, where you go to work, you have a set of tasks, you accomplish them, and more we're only generating jobs that require you to basically produce some form of, like, to produce something that didn't exist before, which is it's not something that everyone wants to do.
Yep.
We kind of got onto this, so I'll just give a quick. So the summary, the main argument of the speaker is that AI is just a form of automation and an extension of automation, and has the same economic impacts as automation has had since the Industrial Revolution. And those impacts are that they don't necessarily take jobs away from the job market. What they do, or when they do, excuse me, when they do take away jobs from the job market, they generate new jobs as well, because people have increased wealth, so there's money to spend on a larger amount of things. But what that does do is it creates structural unemployment, because people aren't trained to do the new services that people are looking for. And at the same time, there's an argument, the author makes the argument that AI is accelerating the rate of this displacement. So basically, it's accelerating the rate at which people are needing to adapt to gain new skill sets. So it doesn't necessarily, the argument is it doesn't necessarily take away jobs from the job market, but it changes which jobs are there, and it's accelerating the rate of that change, which is difficult for people, because it means that it's basically forcing people who want to stay employed to increase their rate of learning, or basically continue to learn throughout their lifetime and make sure they're learning skills that are sought after. And the secondary effect of that is that the benefits, or the economic benefits of AI, are really going to be placed in the hands of people who have the money to invest in them. So basically, capital owners, business owners, people who already have money are the ones who are really going to benefit from the wealth that's generated from AI. and consequently, and this is true of all automation, like one of the impacts is that it increases wealth inequality within a country. So those are the economic impacts that the author talks about. And then I think a lot of the video after that is about ways that we could possibly mitigate it. So
Peter, that reminds me about Ray Dalio's new book. I just finished reading it. And if you look at a longer history, that happens with like every growth. Every time there is growth in economy, or if a country becomes more powerful, more impactful, that pay gap or the wealth gap increases. And then there is a bust, and then it goes down, and then like the cycle repeats every time in all countries, if you look through the history. I'm not saying it's good, I just realized that it has happened many times and will probably continue happening with progress.
Yeah, I guess one thing I'll say is that we make it sound cyclical, which maybe it is, but I also know that like since the 1980s, like wealth inequality has just been growing throughout the world. So I don't know when there's going to be a correction to that, if there is, and if there is, then we are truly in a cyclic situation.
Cyclical in like 200-year cycles. So I don't want to talk about this book, but yes, it's been growing, and while in the past, whenever there was a growth, then there is also a decline. But in like 200-year cycles, sometimes it's shorter, sometimes longer, but it doesn't have to be 5-year cycles.
So we excuse me. I think since the Industrial Revolution, maybe up to the 70s or 80s, there was a decrease in wealth inequality worldwide, and now we're in a increasing phase. So does that mean for the next 200 years we're going to be in increasing phase of wealth inequality?
No, I can't make predictions like that. But after the Industrial Revolution, there was an increase in the UK, and then UK's influence curve has been declining. The American one has been increasing. Now the Chinese one is increasing, American decreasing. So probably at some point there will be a switch, but we don't know when. But whenever there is this switch, the UK one was after the World Wars, right? So it's like it's a longer cycle, and I'm just saying that these things have happened. Yeah.
There might be the other question is say if AI and robotics becomes sufficiently cheap and capable to get rid of most work, and I would say that it's probably possible, right? So if you look at agriculture, how many people are nowadays in agriculture that used to be there? A lot less people with a lot more output. So if we extend this so that the only jobs that are left over is like YouTuber and the occasional researcher. Of course, at some point, politics will have to answer the question: what do we do with work? Right, work is actually also maybe not always has been a part of human history. If you look very back, we were hunter-gatherers. So you could argue there was no such thing as work. We're going out, hunt, eat, and rinse and repeat. What would happen if we were trying to get rid of such a system? Right? So what happens if we eradicate work? How could we make people's lives meaningful? And at some point, probably the question of universal income will have to be addressed, because if you don't, and if you have large swaths of society being very much disenfranchised, it will create social unrest. Any thoughts?
No, I agree with that. And I feel like it's not something that we really think about or try to address right now. Partially because I think everyone is kind of thinking like it's going to happen to everyone but me, or they're not thinking about it, you know. Like one I know this isn't completely related, but one thing that that Jerry Kaplan said in the video, which I thought was a really interesting thought experiment, was he points out that in like the 1800s, 90% of the US workforce was doing agriculture, and now less than 2% of the US workforce works in agriculture. And he said, what if in 200 years, only like automation is such that only it takes 2% of the labor force in order to accomplish 90% of the labor that's done right now. And I was thinking, like, imagine what, like, if there is still a labor force at that point, and like, what is that other 90% going to be doing? Like, what are we going to be doing at that point?
Yeah, he also made the point that, you know, 100 years ago, people would have maybe one shower a week, and nowadays we do it every day. While that might be true, at some point that is resource intensive, and we are definitely at the point where we realize that resources are finite. So this indefinite growth of demand probably can't keep up. Even probably if we were to catapult the rest of the world in terms of consumption to the first world, we probably would be looking at a collapsing system. And so I don't think this his reasoning that this can go on forever is just not true.
I think one a hard question related to all of this discussion is, as people who are developing AI or within working within companies or in academia developing AI, do we have any responsibilities to think about, like, obviously we have a responsibility to think about these things, but should it influence our actions in any way? I really don't know the answer to this, even though it's something I thought a lot about, especially when I was working in robotics, because I feel like it's even more tangible there.
I have a cheesy answer, but it might sound a bit weird, if I may. I think as long as you put human in the loop, and as well as in the feedback, I think you can avoid the dystopian scenario.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we can always pull the power switch unless the AI prevents that. We probably don't want to, because it gives a lot of good stuff. But yeah, it's as most things, we just have to learn how to deal with it in a way that people are comfortable with it.
Like letting them know, let the technology know that it's a bit like I learn something from the tech and the tech learns something from me. For example, this is a very simple example, like in classification systems, you sort of restrict the AI and you assume that the human is this the expert. So it's only when they start exploring, then the feedback comes in. But if the human beings are willing to accept that feedback, then I think it will be more like a supportive community, not necessarily spiraling in a competition, which I think the Hunger Games series sort of highlights a lot.
I do worry about one of the main things I worry about related to all of this is like kind of the thought experiment that Arvid described before, which is that we over time create larger and larger amounts of wealth inequality and less jobs for people. And at some point, it's just like something's got to give. That's the whole point. And it could either be like the Luddite approach of severely limiting the amount of technology we can use in society so that we create more requirements for human labor, or something else where we, I don't know, distribute wealth in a way that allows people to support themselves without working. I don't know what the solution is, but I definitely have a preference for the latter rather than the former, because I like what I do and I would like to be able to continue to do what I do. So So one of the things that and consequently, part of me wonders if maybe one of the responsibilities as someone who develops AI is to like keep this in mind and try to find ways to help develop a system that allows for like basically more of a welfare state. And so people like don't suffer based on the impacts of what I do.
I think that for anyone doing work that has impact on others, whether that's developing AI or something else, it should be one of your responsibilities to consider how that impact can grow and how that impact can change the world potentially. Saying that, I don't think you can always consider every implication. And also the other side that I, for example, sometimes thought about and don't know what the answer is how do you know that what you believe is the best, is truly the best for the society? It's just your set of beliefs or the set of beliefs of the group of people developing something. But you don't know that if that is really the best for the society.
I'd like to add to what Natalie said. I think I came across an article for OpenAI running an experiment, and the machines, they developed a language on their own. It was something along these lines, and they were communicating. The same thing happened with Facebook as well. So like it holds to what you say. Like if you're a researcher, the best you can do is open source everything you do and not hide it. Like I'm not saying Elon Musk is hiding or Mark Zuckerberg. It's just proprietary projects lead to a lack of trust from the public. So as a researcher, just open source everything.
There was something I wanted to say about this.
I think we as humans also will have eventually to do a lot of more soul searching on what is meaning in life, right? And
yeah.
I don't think there is even an objective answer, right? That life might be inherently meaningless. Doesn't mean we should live life like it had no meaning. And interesting, it might be that religion is coming back, right? So if you think of, I think in Saudi Arabia right now, you have a large percentage of the workforce being essentially unemployable because they study theology to such an extent that can't really do any real work. But that might be exactly the thing we need in the future when we have no work left. If 80% of people spend their life praising God, whatever that means, at least they're not doing too much damage, right?
So, okay, two things. One, I remember what I wanted to say based on Natalia's point, which is, yeah, I think it's very true that we don't know if what we think is right is a correct solution, or the maybe correct is always the wrong word in this case. I think maybe like the best solution in terms of benefiting people. And related to that is what I was saying before. I was like, I've just been astounded by like realizing how much bias we bake into the way that we think about things. So if anything, I think that an equal responsibility along the lines of trying to find like ways to mitigate the negative impacts of what we do is also just trying to make sure that there's less and less bias. We're trying to keeping into account how much bias is in the way that we view things. Like AI is intelligent if it can do things that we use intelligence to accomplish. That's like one of the main biases that they talk about in this talk. So yeah, I think that's a really important element to all of this, which is like, if we want to really be able to do these things, we have to be understanding of the fact that we're inherently biased and try to keep more of an open mind consequently. Yeah. I don't remember what I was going to say in terms of Arvid's point, but we only have 1 minute left. So does anyone have any closing comments or things they want to say about the Like, or anything else about this topic before we close? No, cool. So I'll stop sharing and I will.
Is Ben presenting the next week?